In 10 years from now, this moment will be what defined my career as a furniture maker. Okay, this is where the rubber meets the road. I've just quit my day job and this is my first commission, so I have to get this one right. At the end of 2023, life presented me with an opportunity to fulfill a long-time goal of becoming a full-time furniture maker. Around the same time, I received an email from someone looking for a large piece of furniture. Perfect timing. This is the exciting and somewhat terrifying true story of how I completed my first major client commission. This was a big project that almost broke me. My first step on this journey was to figure out how much it would cost, like actual money out of the bank, to build this piece of furniture, a reptile enclosure. I checked out a bunch of timber yards, some successful, some not so successful.
I assume they've closed. Of course they closed. It's the weekend of Christmas.
But I felt like I was missing something. If you've quoted a woodworking job before, you'll know what a minefield it can be. I had heard that it can be tough, but I felt way out of my depth going into this. So I called up two people who I trust who have been doing this for a very long time. First off, thanks obviously for jumping on. I've costed out the materials, but I don't know the best way to go about charging my time. So do you charge a day rate, an hour rate? Is there a certain amount that you will always charge?
I like the idea and principle of a day rate because it's so quote unquote easy to say, oh, that'll take me 2 days. The trap there is that you forget some critical aspects of the job. It's a really good exercise. I mentally build each job as I'm quoting it, and then I usually round up to the next day.
Okay. While I didn't like that answer because it meant more work to come up with a figure, it did mean that when I went back to the client with it, I was a lot more confident. And on a side note, if you want to watch the full interview with Joey and Brian, I'll link to it in the top right-hand corner. If you're in the industry, this is a really good watch. So I sent the price to the client over email, and later that day, I got a call. All right, so that was the client. They are happy with the amount that I've quoted them on. So now I'm going to send through the official quote, and that's going to have my payment details for the 50% deposit. Once that comes through, I can buy the material and get started. I'm on my way up to Studio Doubled to collect some wood for this commission. This is the first commission that I'm doing as a business owner, and I'm so excited about it. So this is all the big ash, not too much left, but they are getting in a new batch in a couple of weeks. Something to keep in mind is that big ash is about to become a very rare commodity with the logging ban. All right, loaded up. That is enough for at least the side panels and maybe some of the shelves, but I think I'll be back for a little bit more. All right, I have all the timber. Let's get into this. This next part of the project, which was frustratingly also the first part of the build, didn't quite go to plan. I had to rip a third off of these 140mm wide boards and take 2 of those thin strips and glue them together to make another board. However, even with a new blade, I was still having so many issues, and because it had to be relatively precise, it made it even more crucial that the cuts were good. Well, that was an absolute disaster, and if you track along this board, you will notice a massive taper. It turns out the reason that the blade was drifting is because I was cranking down too hard on the fence, and I'd actually been pushing the fence slightly that way. So this lock mechanism can obviously only take so much. Well, no wonder that cut didn't work so great. That screw thread fell out halfway through the cut. So this bearing has just dropped. Yep. There it is. No wonder I was having to force that through. I am very lucky that didn't just snap the blade, actually. I've wanted to be a full-time furniture maker for almost 10 years now. I have dreamed about the moment when I quit my day job and I sink everything into making one-of-a-kind pieces of art. And here I am on day one, completely stuffing it up. Well, it wasn't a very fun cut to make, but that's really not bad. That'll work. That was very unpleasant. I knew 140mm was going to be ambitious, but even with a new blade, I mean, you can see on this last board, I don't know what happened, if it was just the grain fighting me, but I've separated all of the thickest boards, the good boards, put them in this pile over here. I can start running them through the thicknesser, then I can thickness these the same size as this. If none of that makes sense, just keep watching.
And after all that milling, I'm left with 3 different piles. The first are the main thick panels. Over here, I've got all the thin panels, so I'll glue these together, and that'll make up a full panel of one of these. That way I have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 1 spare thin board just in case. And now with everything roughly at the same thickness, between 17 and 20 mil, I can put it all through the thicknesser one more time to get it all to the same thickness. The thinnest board here is 17 mil. I'm hoping not to go past that, but if I do, worst case scenario, it'll be 16 mil. And that's fine, that'll still work. Looking at the thickness of these boards, 16 is gonna be perfect. It's time to slow things down a bit now and take some time figuring out what order I want these boards to be glued up in. The nice thing about Vic Ash is that the grain is so obnoxious that even if your glue joint isn't perfect, it's almost certainly just going to disappear amongst the sea of grain lines. One thing you do need to be careful of though is the tone and color of the timber, because this can vary from pink all the way up to brown. And if you put a brown board next to a pink board, it is very obvious. You may have also noticed the arrows that I was drawing on these boards earlier. That indicated at the time which way I want to run the boards through the thicknesser based on their grain direction. Now I'm using them to make sure the grain of each board follows the same direction. Doesn't matter which direction it is, I just want to make sure it all flows in one direction. I got caught out by this on a personal project a few years back on a side table. The tabletop was made up of 2 boards glued together, and at the time I didn't realize, but their grain was in opposite directions. So now when I look at it side on, the 2 panels are glaringly obvious because the light reflects differently off them. As that light hits it and reflects in different directions, it's going to draw your eye to the fact that there are those 5 different boards, which is not what I want.
Even with these calls, I didn't quite nail the alignment of the boards in the first glue up because of their long length. So the panels needed a lot of sanding to remove some high spots along the glue lines. In hindsight, instead of trying to glue up all the boards at once, I should have only done 2 or 3 at a time so I had more control, like I did in the later glue ups. Lesson learned.
Just a little tip for the woodworkers out there. These long reach or deep throat clamps are super helpful. Just a couple of them to have around the shop for situations like this with deep panels. So much help. Definitely worth the money.
Something I'm still trying to get my head around is the idea that I'm spending a lot of someone else's money on materials right at the beginning of the project. I spent over $1,200 on timber for this project. I don't think I've spent that kind of money on timber for myself. I was waking up to imposter syndrome every day for those first few weeks. I know for all of you furniture makers out there, this is not a lot of money. And for me, one day it won't be either. But right now, the idea of commanding that kind of financial responsibility is a little scary. It's amazing how suddenly the stakes are up and the pressure's on compared to when this was just a hobby. I wasn't expecting this to test my confidence so much.
Moving on to the shelves next. I've been trying to do everything I can to not make that big 140mm rip cut, but I think I'm going to. I've got 2 choices. I can get dressed timber for twice the price, but it's going to take me half the time to glue the shelves up. So do I save on costs or do I save on time? You can really get stuck in a sort of analysis paralysis, but I think I'm gonna go with the cheaper cost option. I don't know with the dress timber what stock there is around town. And with that big 140mm rip cut, I'm gonna be doing shorter lengths. So that should make it a lot easier to run those boards through. Now that I've cleaned up this timber, I've noticed something that I was hoping wasn't going to be an issue. When I looked at this new batch of timber yesterday at the timber yard, I did think to myself it was a slightly different tone, but I thought, you know, how different could it be? Well, this is the previous batch of timber, and this is yesterday's. For all intents and purposes, these may as well just be different species of tree. So to get around the issue, I'm going to make the shelves mostly out of this beige color, but the front edge, the face frame of the shelf, will have a strip of this pink timber. A bit of a bummer, but if you wanted some value and takeaway from this video, here it is. Take a piece of timber with you to the timber yard if you're trying to match up color and tone.
Doing the big rip cut the second time around was way better because I implemented the basics better. I milled the timber first, so it was flat on the table and on the fence, so I didn't feel like I was having to force it against the fence the whole time. I clamped the other end of the fence in place so it added a lot more support. I started the cut slow to set the blade accurately, and then I made sure to focus on feed speed.
Righto, that is the last board done. And I have just enough pieces here to make up the 5 shelves. I bought extra timber, I used extra timber, I'm so glad that I did. Okay, same as the side panels, I've got some thick boards, some thin boards. The thin boards get glued up, then we get all the boards the same size, probably around 18 mil.
Now, with all the panels panelized, I could start working on the joinery. Finally. Nothing fancy here, just a few dados for the shelves to sit in. I clamped both sides together for this cut to make sure that the dados were the same distance from the floor, and this would mean that the shelves were level. I've over-engineered this joint in the past, but really this is all you need, and its strength will become apparent later on in the video.
All right, time for a cleanup. Look at this.
While I had my rider out, I also cut dados into the underside of the shelves for the client to run 240 volt wire. This would be for the lights in each tank. The main glue up was pretty stressful because of the size of the pieces. I had to move relatively quickly and get everything lined up while also fighting one cupped shelf. After getting all the shelves glued into the one side, I sat back, took a breather, and figured out how I would get the second side glued in place, and then I got back into it. You can see towards the end of the video, I dash out of the workshop. I'm going to my car to get some extra ratchet straps as a last ditch effort to try and cinch everything together. It's like no matter how much you plan out a complicated glue up, there's always some kind of surprise midway through it. This was a pivotal point in the build because everything up until this moment and everything after it could have been fixed relatively easily. But if I'd made a mistake during the glue up, it would have required a serious amount of work to fix it. Thankfully, everything went together mostly as expected, and it only required a little bit of planing on the back of the middle shelf. The top and bottom shelf were glued and screwed in place, and that was the cabinet all glued up. For the back panel, I used a 9mm sheet of hardwood ply. I screwed this into the back of the cabinet first before moving it because this would brace it and potentially stop it from racking, which unfortunately came in handy later on.
Hang on a minute, that fit first time. I might even call myself a woodworker.
These small holes that I'm cutting into the back of it are for that 240 volt wiring to run through. Then this happened.
Feck.
At this point, I was very close to just handing back the deposit to the client and throwing in the towel. Not that I couldn't fix the damage, if there even was any, but it just felt like the last straw.
I think it's stuck. I can't lift this by myself. I don't think there's any real damage.
I was already under so much pressure with this build, and this accident just made me feel completely out of my depth. In hindsight, pushing forward through this will always be a kind of badge of honor and a key memory in my career. Dan came around later that day to help me lift it up, and it only just cleared the ceiling. And at that point, I could inspect the damage.
Well, that was something. I've had a look over the whole cabinet, and the worst bit of damage is down here in the corner where it's crushed a little bit. There's a bit of a split, but with some epoxy that will stabilize completely and you won't even notice it. Other than that, there's a bit of damage on this corner, but since adding some water to it, the grain has just plumped right up, and once I round that over, you're not even going to notice it. So really, all things considered, it came out mostly unscathed, and this is a great example of why you build with hard timber.
So, crisis averted, I was back into it.
That is a lot less racking than I was expecting.
The back panel required cutouts to allow for airflow, and these needed to be covered with a mesh. And the client specifically asked that that mesh was accessible so it could be replaced if necessary. If you're wondering, this is a 6.5mm aperture wire mesh. With the back panel off, I could then clamp the face frame onto the cabinet. This is using that pinker timber that I mentioned earlier that would match the side panels. This timber was also giving the shelves a little bit more strength to stop them from sagging. Righto, time for finish, and I'm going pretty low tech on this one. It is boiled linseed oil and terps mixed 50-50. I've done some tests with this and it comes up with a really nice finish, and it's also quite economical. So for this application, it's pretty perfect. Then I needed something for the Perspex doors to slide in. To give the Perspex something to slide in, I'm going to be using this aluminium track, and then to finish that off, I'll be using some of this aluminium angle. This is the part of the build where I really got into my groove. All of the hard parts were done, so now I could just focus on making the small details as good as I could get them. The design called for a box that would slide in and out of the bottom shelf. This meant building more panels out of Vic Ash. In the end, I decided to spend the extra money and just buy some dress material. I did the maths, and it costs around $180 extra for the dress material, which equates to about 3 hours of my time. And the time it takes me to rip and dress these boards would come close to, if not even more than 3 hours anyway. And buying a dress meant that I could move along with the project a lot quicker. At this stage, I'd already been going for around 2 months. I'm building the box sides up, stacking the boards to make it look like a box join. With the 2 long sides done, I could route a dado into the 2 short pieces, and this would help align everything during glue up. While cutting out the front panel, I couldn't quite finish it off with my handsaw, so I had to bring out the ultimate crude tool, a reciprocating saw. I felt a little dirty after this, but to be fair, it got the job done. Actually, no, you know what? A tool's a tool. At the end of the day, if you can carve the Michelangelo with a crowbar, power to you. For the lid, I used butt hinges. I know, having said that, half the audience is currently leaving, but stay with me, I have my reasons. Using internal hinges, of course, would have looked more slick, but I don't have a lot of experience with them yet. And more importantly, this is still a very functional piece of furniture. So spending time on hinges to figure out how they work is an expense that neither I or the client would want to take on.
You may be looking at this thinking, it's a bit strange that there's an overhang on the back by the hinges. Normally you would have the top panel or the lid flush with the back. But the reason for that is there's going to be a cable, a 240 volt cable that's going to come out of this lid that goes to a light underneath this lid. So when this lid is opened, if that gap wasn't there, then that wire would get pinched.
Then it was onto a material that I hadn't used before.
I've got the perspex out. I've got my fence for cutting a straight line. Now it's time to cut this.
I was a bit nervous cutting into this because I'd never done it before, and each sheet cost $70 and took over a week to arrive. So if I'd made a mistake on this, it would be costly. But I got a new blade with a high tooth count and it cut flawlessly.
I don't think I'm taking this mask off until I'm outside and at least 10 meters away. What a mess. And everything sticks to everything.
I've ended up opening up the shop to get some air in here, which I hate doing because all that nice conditioned air now gets blown out and it's hot and humid, but just the smell from that perspex is just lingering in the air, and I don't like the idea of that being something that I'm breathing in.
Ignoring all the mess and smell, it was really easy to work with. With the perspex cut, I could add it to the inside of the box, as well as add some handles and latches. I found out later that this box would most likely house a red-bellied black snake, so keeping it closed and locked was pretty important. Adding some felt tape to the underside of the box would help it slide in and out. I've used it like this before and it works really well.
All right, I'm reaching the final stages of this build. I am so excited. There's just a few more small bits here and there that need to be buttoned up. For example, adding feet, putting some latches on the box. I've got to pull all the film off the perspex. So that's what I'm taking care of today. And then tomorrow, the client is coming around to have a look at it and make sure that functionally, everything is correct. The last thing I want is to deliver this to him and then we find a problem and it has to come all the way back. So tomorrow he's going to come around, make sure he's happy with everything, and then on the weekend, in 3 days time, I'll load it up and deliver it out. It is so close, I almost have my workshop back.
The client was happy with everything, so Dan came back around to help me lay the enclosure down. That way I could oil the top and bottom and add the feet. And then it was moving day.
All right, here we go. Probably a good time to say thank you to Mark and Dan for coming out to help me with this. All right, all loaded up, heading across town.
On site, we removed all of the film off the perspex and got talking to the client about what his plans were for the enclosure. He showed us some of his snakes, which was pretty cool, and where in the unit he planned on putting them. Unfortunately, at the time of publishing this video, he hadn't finished setting up the tanks, but as soon as he does, he's gonna send me a photo and then I will post it so you get to see the finished result.
Done.
Standing back and looking at the enclosure, I think it really suits the room in both color and style. But hey, either way, the client was happy, so that makes me happy. So at the end of the day, I managed to complete my first client commission, deliver it successfully, and leave the client smiling. That is a win in my book.
All done. I am pretty tired. That was a lot of work to get that across town, but I'm so excited. Look behind me. Nothing. Space. So much space. Oh, it's good to have my workshop back.
You'll notice I haven't shown any financial details in this video like I have in previous videos. And that's because of the scale of the project. I never went into this expecting to be paid for all of my time. I didn't lose money, but I certainly lost track of the hours that I put into this. But as the first of hopefully many client commissions, my gauge for success was completing the build and following the client's design requirements. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Robin Lewis. I hope you enjoyed this video. Take care, and I will see you in the next one.